Can you hear me still?
Yeah.
What's up, folks? Eddie Ed here. It's the 9th of August, 2021. It's 10 minutes to 9 o'clock, 8:50 p.m. on the East Coast, Eastern Standard Time in the United States. I'm broadcasting tonight with Bob from Australia, Citizen Australia. We did an interview with Bob earlier this year. I think I was in Florida, actually, at the time. And we're going to catch up with Bob.
Oh,
yeah, no, you're right. I think it was in November. Yeah, actually. Yeah, it was. It was my first kind of trip down to Florida in the recent times, and we're gonna catch up with Bob and kind of ask an Australian about all the crazy events we've been seeing on video, on the internet, happening over in his country, and then get his take on the geopolitical situation. But Bob, I wanted to thank you for coming on today, sir. Thanks again for coming on the show, and I know people are looking forward to see what you have to say.
My pleasure, and it's 10 to 11 in the morning in southeastern coast of Australia here in the state of Victoria.
Oh, wow. Excellent. And how, because I've actually been kind of trying to get the videos out of the protests that have been going on, not just in Australia, but England, Spain, Thailand. I think we've seen some in Canada, Netherlands, France, Germany, Italy. What are things like in Australia? Are they as bad as it seems at times, or what is your status like? Because I know you are in the country.
I'm in the country, right? I've been retired for 20 odd years, and we live probably more or less what we have always done the last 20 years, you know, go up the street, go for a walk, take a ride, go for a trip in the country or to the beach for a few days, or take a trip overseas every couple of years we've been able to do. The only thing that's changed since March last year was that, you know, we haven't been able to really travel overseas, not that we would have anyway from that time onwards anytime soon, but the only other restriction is unable to be able to duck into Melbourne, which is about a 2-hour drive from where we live into the city area from the country here. And that's been a bit frustrating. But for the rest, from a retired person, age 75, living in the country, it really hasn't affected us at all. You know, I'm sort of embarrassed to say. I mean, the only thing that we occasionally need to don is some masks for shopping, and that's about it. So, you know, maybe from a pandemic, blooming COVID story experience from me, I won't say ask the wrong guy, but I've got plenty of opinions about the subject, but that's another story. But, you know, but out of our 7 states, I can tell you this, 5 of them are in, 2 are still in lockdown. And we're slowly coming out of it, I would say, right? We had definitely been locked down in 5 of our states. Now I think there's only 2 states left. That's, I don't know, right, I've just made a little note of it. Get my glasses. Western Australia, and there's no lockdown. South Australia, that's right, no lockdown. Northern Territory, no lockdown. Queensland, yes. Since 8th of August, they're still in lockdown. Victoria is still in lockdown now in the city only, and the country area of southeastern state of Australia, Victoria, where I live, is now out of lockdown, the country. And the other state, which is Tasmania, if you can call it a state, that's the little island south of Victoria, south of Australia, was always, interesting little fact, but was always isolated from the mainland, and they never really had any COVID deaths. So that was very interesting. They just locked anybody from the mainland from coming in, and they've only had about 200 odd cases, no deaths. And the thing about Australia, since March last year, has been that we've had a total of only 900 deaths, supposedly due to COVID. And that is, what's that, 16 odd months period, which is really small for a 25 million population country to call a pandemic, but that's my view sneaking in there again. But, so overall, I would say the pandemic side of the whole storyline in Australia, and in my opinion, the world, has been highly over, amplified and exaggerated and so forth.
And so where was the strictest part of Australia, would you say? Would that be the capital? Would that be in Melbourne in terms of the lockdown protocols?
Yeah, in our state, it's Melbourne City, right? There you've got a 4 kilometre limit and so forth. We had that until yesterday. Now we can travel around the state. I'm not sure what it means in going to the capital city. I'd have to ask my wife how that works. But from a state point of view, it's just in the capital city in Victoria, which is the southeastern part of Australia. The state that's in the biggest, the two states in the biggest pickles is New South Wales, which is the next state up from where we live in Victoria. And Queensland is further north to that. They're also in a bit of a quandary with lockdowns in recent days and last week or two. They've had cases and the government's reacted typically like other governments worldwide, and to me overreacted and not really looking at deaths. They're looking at cases again, which is not the same to me. And I did a study last year, Eddie, around August, which was like 7, 8, about 5 months after the lockdown or the emergency procedures and wearing masks and so forth impacted us in Australia in March 2020. And I did a case of how many people had died for that first 4, 5, 6 months of the year in previous years, due to the common cold, flu. And it was like the year before was 400 died of flu, the year before 1,200, the year before that 900. And then I did that comparison of about 3 years to, March to August of 2020 and looked at the COVID so-called deaths. And that was, I think, at that time in Australia-wide, what was it? Maybe 400. And that was no different or much less, well, on the average, on par with the previous 3 to 5 years deaths for that first 6 odd period of the year. Our winter season is June, July, August, September type of month. Was no different from the previous 3 to 4 or 5 years due to the common cold. So I asked myself, what are we really measuring and what are we really panicking about? And I did write a letter to our local newspaper asking the question, have people really looked at the statistics of previous years and compared them with the common flu and a few other things, and didn't something seem a bit odd, is how I put it in the newspaper. Didn't get published. I must have been I thought I was being very diplomatic in how I put the view, and not to put too much any emotion into it. I thought I was being pretty factual, but it wasn't up to the editor's allowance for being shown to the public in the letters to the editor section of our local newspaper. So there you go. That was my effort to try and say to people, wake up, something's not right. It doesn't pass the smell test, all this, locking down. Look at the previous figures, just the common cold. And the other thing was, I put in there, look at the number of deaths reported due to the common cold at that time, from March 2020 to that August period that I was comparing. I think it was 13 or 30 odd was died due to the flu. In other words, the flu suddenly disappeared and we got this other mysterious flu-like, sudden pandemic called COVID come into its place and scared the hell out of us. So, that's sort of my little background on what
And
I think of the
have
whole
you
thing.
written before for local papers? Do you
I have a little bit,
Yeah.
but not terribly much, only maybe 3 or 4 or 5 times in my life.
Okay. Well, so you do have some experience, journalistic experience getting published.
Well, my job sort of required, I worked as an industrial chemist at a large power station in the area here. We produce, or did produce, about 75% of the electrical energy for the whole state of state of Victoria up till about 10, 20 years ago, which is when
And
I
you said
retired.
Australia has 5 states. Is that correct?
7 total.
7 states. Okay, 7 states in total.
West Australia, Northern Territory, South Australia, Queensland, New South Wales, Victoria, and then south of Australia in the southeast, we've got Tasmania, which is also a state, but it's actually a little island up there. So 7 states, yeah.
Okay. And again, 2 of them are locked down, you said, and 5 are not.
Yeah, 2 are still locked down. The other 5 are, I think, slowly getting out of our winter sort of flu season. Let's face it, it's a flu season, but it's suddenly got a different name.
Yeah, it does indeed. Many things have different names now, it seems.
Don't they?
What have you been focusing on? Because I know you do pay attention to a lot of geopolitics, and what are your sources? What do you like going to recently, and what has been your focus?
My interest, my interest is still about our origins, our human origins, and there's a very interesting couple of guys in New South Wales looking at plenty of evidence, plenty of proof with recent skulls they found, recent very, very old and ancient bronze and brass type of rings they've suddenly come their way from Cambodia, Indonesia, and found 3-4 meters underground in Australia, and sort of pointing out to that the old, as you said, a lot of things are changing in the last 30, 40 years, that the old sort of established or more or less generally accepted story of the out of Africa theory of the human race is really starting to look really shaky when you look at this information that these guys in Australia have been featuring over the last 20, 30 years. It's been remarkable. And that's sort of been taken up my focus a fair bit. What are our origins? Where do we actually come from? Where did religion start, and where did all the tribes of the old, the Bible era sort of move from, and where did the tribes from, the ancient tribes of, what do you call it? In the Bible, the 12 lost tribes of Benjamin, or the Benjamin group of tribes that scattered all over the world. It was always interesting, where did the various groups of people go, and that's been a fair big part of my interest in the last 10, 20 years or longer. And the other things I do is follow you guys, but I think the only guy I really truly follow has been George. And when I've really been focusing for a long time, sometimes I just need a little break for a few weeks from that, because, well, you can't keep presenting anything new every day for 4, 5, 6 years. Although George Webb, who we're talking about, is doing a bloody good job of keeping you on your toes and digging up new stuff every day, which is so fascinating, right? It's like a page-turning blooming spy novel that, it's very Moorish and very, I've got to get a bit of my drug for the day and go to George's 1 or 2 hour broadcast every day. But I can sort of take it or leave it, but it's still a nice occupation for an hour or so in the morning for me, you know, to catch up on the day's activities. And it's mainly, as I said, from America or from, you know, the deep state's activities and that sort of thing, because as George says, that virus, and it's still a big mystery what this virus actually is or how it came to be or how fast it spreads, notwithstanding all the theories that George has on spreading it with spraying and air conditioning and God knows what, you know. I still have a big problem with the transmissibility of a virus in general from all the research I've done, and I've done tons. That was another interest of mine the last, you know, 2 years of really researching day and night on what the hell is a virus, who's ever seen a virus, who's ever isolated a virus, who's ever established beyond doubt that this virus causes that particular illness. You know, to do that, you have to have human guinea pigs or human volunteers to sit, if you like, next to sick people with a particular virus suspected disease, right? And have them together, a healthy lot of human volunteers versus a sick lot of volunteers, have them cough and interact and all that sort of thing together, you know, if you can get the volunteers, which is, of course, is going to be a bit tricky and hard to do, and there won't be too many tests, but that is really, Eddie, the only scientific way to establish how contagious and how transmissible a flaming virus or even a cold or a flu or any sort of bacteriological disease or virus type disease can be, is to do the physical human to human test and having a particular bacteria or virus isolated, right? And to determine that if I give this virus, which I reckon is making you sick, Eddie, if I can get that into your body and you're willing to, as a guinea pig, willing to take that as a test to see if you'll get sick like this guy here that we know, that we think we reckon has got this virus, then let's see how we're going. And that just hasn't been done. And they talk about, you know, this latest virus, the Delta strain, is so much more contagious. What do you mean contagious? That the tests are showing up more and more that they're spreading really fast again? What's the mechanism? Is it by hand-to-hand contact? Is it from sneezing? Is it from coughing onto healthy people from sick people and all this? Nobody does those tests, but they just come out with saying it's very contagious, it's very this, you've got to isolate. I'm not convinced that, and I've seen some very interesting human-to-human tests done on the Spanish flu, and I haven't seen any other human-to-human test where you had sick people that had the Spanish flu in a controlled environment with healthy people. I've seen the reports, and they're pretty rare, but I've seen them, and I can document, and I can give you that copies of it if anybody's interested, references to it and whatnot, links. But they did test on 3 groups of people back after or during the pandemic or the Spanish flu period. A total of 100 people were tested. They volunteered. How did they volunteer? Well, they volunteered. They were sailors, essentially, a group of 30 or 40 in 3 different locations they tested. What they did was they got the volunteers of sailors who were in prison, right? So they said, look, do you guys want to be in a test? We'll give you, a little reward, is that we'll reduce your sentence or this and that. So that's how you're going to get volunteers in such a pretty sensitive sort of a test, you know. So, of course, today you say, well, nobody's stupid enough to volunteer to get a job, although, you know, the way they tested these, what was it? The virus phenomena, the super speed, warp speed way they introduced or wanted to develop these vaccines for the corona. they did very limited tests with people, but they'd got some volunteers, and probably similarly on the basis of, look, you know, your life's worthless, or you're going to be in prison for another 30, 40 years. Do you want to be a part of this, you know, test to see if you drop dead when I inject it over the next couple of weeks? Oh, yeah, okay, I'm willing to take that risk. And, you know, let's face it, viruses don't kill people, you know, 1 out of 10, but maybe 1 every 100, 500,000 people do get bloody strange and horrible side effects from these 2 or 3 different viruses. So, you know, to actually say this thing is spread from person to person, I'm not convinced. I reckon, if you ask me, and while I'm on a go, I'll keep talking. Is that all right? If you ask me, and I think we had very briefly discussed this last year when we had a chat, I think viruses are everywhere, right? Within our body, in the environment. And the only time they come out, they become active, whatever they are, they don't seem to be living cells, because they haven't got a DNA or a nucleus of such in their cell structure, right? They seem to come alive or active when there's toxins or poisons in the air or in your body, right? So it's an external out there situation with virus. They're everywhere. There's billions of them. And within our body, they're just lying dormant until such a time when something really gets unbalanced and upset in our system, our immune system, or in the environment, like, you know, radiation or heavy metal pollution or whatever you want to call it. And the same with the food or the drugs or the poisons that we've accumulated over the previous 12 months. You suddenly get the flu of some sort, which is not that you're sick, it's actually that your body is reacting to a poison or a substance, toxin in your body that apparently the bacteria can't cope with anymore. It's that bad. Normally bacteria in your body will clean up any, you know, minor waste and so forth from your body. But when the waste in your body gets so toxic that the bacteria are helpless to help us out, then the viruses come into play for the really heavy metal, heavy toxin, heavy drug abuse, poisons that we've been taken in and have accumulated over 6, 12, 18 months, 2 years type of thing. Then we start to feel sick. That's actually the viruses that become active due to this huge imbalance in our chemistry in our body, start to then take over and do the work that the bacteria can't do. And the viruses then gobble up all this stuff, comes out through your lungs, you cough up stuff, you blooming, you know, stuff comes out of your mouth, out of your eyes, out of your ears, out of your backside, you name it. And that's actually the healing process or the healing period. And not people say, oh, you're sick, but actually that's the process of healing that these bacteria, but in the case of these viruses, when your body is really poisoned with toxins and whatnot, it's these viruses that are doing this healing work inside. And the same, as they say in the old wisdom teaching, as above, so below, as without, so within, right? The within is the same as the without. So what happens within our bodies, clearing up this toxicity and poisons over the years that we've accumulated it, or over the months of any particular year, right? The flu comes around periodically, so it must be almost an annual cleaning up process, right, of the environment, which gets plenty of stuff thrown into it from power station, exhaust, you name it. So you get this external cleaning up process going on every year, every 6 months, and the same within. And that is, to me, when people say, oh, you know, it's highly contagious, how could it have spread from Europe, I'm talking about Spanish flu now, to Australia, to America, to Japan, to China, to Russia? It's already everywhere present, just lying dormant. But you know, during the war, think of all the poisonous gas and that were flying around and how quick that can spread worldwide with the trade winds and all this sort of stuff, the earth rotating and everything else. Something activates these viruses that are lying dormant with all this poisons from all the wars. Also, all the stress and the anxiety of people's lives during war periods, you know, also plays on how balanced and how imbalanced your immune system, your health system, or your whole, you know, well-being is during those periods of stress and strain. They also add up to why you might end up coming out with these, you know, very rapid spread of what looks like pandemics and diseases that we still have a long way to go into determining how the hell they spread so fast and what's the mechanism and what are these bloody blighters that do this to us or whatever, you know. So it's just a little
you
waffle
mentioned
there.
The state of people's health during wartime. Do you think that we Earth maybe at large, because if there were to be an armed conflict, I think it would be a world conflict. Do you think we are heading towards a war? And I also wanted to ask as well any thoughts you had on China.
Just the way the world is coming in. I mean, there's theories and there's thoughts that, you know, that there's the whole universe is in a balance of plus and minus, right? And the whole thing is held together, plus and minus. Your body is positive and negative. There's black and white. There's good and evil. And it's all part of a whole. You can't have one without the other. You can't distinguish anybody unless there's some contrast with black or white. If you were just surrounded, if you were just inside a white room with no other color available, right, you've got nothing to compare to. You've got nothing to relate to. And if you're in that perfect white environment, there's no stimulation. You literally would go out of your mind in no time, right? You would go out of your mind because you've got no relationship to anything, you know. If somebody were to put a bloody black dot into your close white space, all of a sudden you've got a relationship. I can see let's call it a dot. You look at yourself, you can look at the dot, you say, I'm bigger than the dot, and you know, you suddenly get that contrast, and you can start start getting a relationship, talking about
right.
Where do I see the world going with wars? Well, in a way, I think there's been a war going on in a higher level. You know, it's been talked about in the ancient traditions, ancient religions, ancient texts of many religious cultures around the world, that there's always been dark forces versus good forces, or forces at work and fighting each other and competing, and the good has won over the dark at times. But it seems that there's been an ever forever type of good and evil battle going on on Earth since time immemorial, since our written history or anything about our history. So we were never, we virtually have never been without war of some sort, whether you want to call it a physical war, a mental war, a psychological war. You know, there's always been sort of sacrifice or pain and suffering, which is a kind of war. What we're seeing at the moment, I reckon, we've had these world wars, right, which, despite what they were promised, they were supposed to lead to everlasting peace, right? That was the theory of them. We've had I think World War One was called the biggest, largest war to end all wars finally and forever. Didn't happen. We got World War Two. We got Korea. We got Vietnam. We got Iraq. We got Iran. Went on and on and on. It almost looked like the US in many ways. The US in many ways looked like they wanted to, or the powers that be, or the deep state, whatever you want to call it, right? The darker forces at work that aren't showing up their faces too readily, were up there creating havoc to keep some sort of an aggro or anger and a conflict going, because peace doesn't, it's no good for business. You know, somebody said that war, if you want to invest anywhere, the best place to invest is in war material, in military, whatever, right? It's a bit like the bank. The bank rarely bloody go broke, but investing in war, you know, you're on a winner as well. So back to your question of where do I see? I reckon we're in a sort of a war of our minds now. You know, do we? And it's now really a world phenomenon. You know, this let's face it, this COVID thing is a world event that's literally somehow the majority of world leaders were convinced to close their economies down because of this, right? This new weird respiratory ailment that came supposedly, you know, out of China that we can't deal with unless we lock everybody up and we confine you and we wear masks. We were told to wear masks. And I read the little article in the newspaper that wouldn't publish my letter to the editor. I took out a little cutting there in March, I think it would have been April, and they had 10 points of how to minimize your exposure to this COVID pandemic thing. And number 7 was, clearly, if you are well, do not wear a mask, right? The clear instructions. If you're well, do not wear a mask. Now, you know, within a month or two, they said, no, you're better off wearing a mask, even if it's just a, you know, a scarf just over your head like that. That was fine. A hanky was all right, and all these other little, you know, furphy, real loose disciplinary things that over your mask was okay. And then a month or two after that, then they said, no, this bandana or the scarf is not on, you've got to start now doing this. So they kept modifying their requirements. So, you know, to me, from my aging and long, you know, fairly lengthy years of observation, that smelled of, they don't know what's going on. And we're, you know, a lot of us are being duped into believing that this is really a critical thing. Now, you know, a pandemic, Eddie, a pandemic, you know, or a plague, you know, that we used to read about as kids, maybe in school or high school. You read about the plague, the Black Death, and this bubonic plague, and we had Ebola, you know, where people actually bloody well, dissolved into a black running ball of, you know, whatever it was, goo. That's what I remember reading about in 2000 and something. I thought, geez, what is this? This is really terrible. When you really look at the deaths due to those, you know, those huge pandemics that they claim, it's bloody minimal, you know, when you really look back and you look at all the studies of all these, epidemics in the last 100 years, like polio, you know, anthrax, AIDS, hepatitis C. When you look at the deaths and the claims made by these pharmaceutical people and the health organization institutions that it was vaccine that sort of put an end to, you know, child polio in the 1950s. When you look at now there's a total picture of all the countries' medical records are available, you know, like years later during those epidemic events, when you never got the whole picture until all the records are collated, compared with other countries and all that sort of stuff. Now we've got all the data, and it clearly shows that the vaccines were usually brought in when epidemics came up, however their cause was what, there was something going on, and then naturally, right, because the environment got cleaned up or your body got cleaned up with normal improved living and the viruses doing their work and whatnot, over time, right, might have been 12 months, 18 months, all those epidemic peaked, started to come down. And when you look at those records that are now available in a lot of research papers and books that people are writing, you'll notice that on the way down, most of the vaccines that were introduced by the pharmaceutical and the medical professions happened right on the tail end of these epidemics naturally dying out anyway, and then the viruses were generally started way on the downward side of the epidemic, and they were claiming years later that yes, polio vaccine, this vaccine, that vaccine stopped what could have been a really tragic blah, 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 blah. And then you go, oh, wait a minute, what's the facts? And we didn't have the facts at the time to argue one way or the other. And the publicity stunt of mainstream media, academia, pharmaceutical companies and vested interest won the day with saying that vaccine, the miracle pill, cured all these type of pandemics in recent years. You go, when you really look at the records and do the research into this nasty piece of whatever it is that hit the world, back in January, February, March of last year, knocking, all the practically all the world's economies on the head, you say, that is something that is like a war, what do you call it? A war on the minds, a war on everybody's psyche, notwithstanding that, about 30 or 40% on practically all the small businesses around the world have just about been eliminated through this nasty flaming COVID over-exaggerated, I believe, storyline of killing thousands and all the computer projected statements by, media, medical people and pharmaceutical that, we're projecting this and we're projecting that and our computer, models say this. Well, let's have a look, down the track. Let's have a look next year about this time, June, July, August, and look back and say, didn't really eventuate, did it? What was the real true story? Let's get all this stuff together now. Let's put it together. And I'm convinced you'll find that pandemic, whatever you want to call it, would seem like a highly, highly dubious, correct word that was forced upon us in some, I don't know why or how, but that to me was, I don't know, maybe the last attempt by whoever wants to play war games and gets a lot of benefit from creating wars. That is to me, I'm pretty convinced that this was the last attempt, and it's still going on, but this was the last main attempt to try and subjugate the whole human race to some level of obedience and yes, master type of servitude that we need to break out, and we need to have conversations like we are here to get that out and get people to do their own research and to be happy with who they are and how they live their life, and to blame it on some mysterious disease. Look at your own life. Do you drink to excess? Do you smoke to excess? P.S. Eddie, for you and me, I haven't had a pipe for 5 weeks and I'm saving a fortune. I just gave up. I thought, no, this is ridiculous. Somebody said, are you doing it for health reasons? I said, no, I just thought it was, it wasn't necessary. And I still would love to have a nice pipe, and just listen to you or somebody else raving on about some interesting topic. But 5 weeks, I just cold turkey. That's usually how I do it. and I feel all right. I probably put a bit of gut on just to replace that anxiety for a little bit, but you know, I'll slowly come back into balance again to get that immune system bloody humming away, keeping those bloody viruses inactive, because I don't need them to give me any. You know, the last 20 years I've been retired, never had a cough in my bloody life, and I haven't even had the flu since retiring from the workforce, since living a retired life. Now, speaking of, you know, contagion and infectiousness and how things pass on, my wife and I went overseas 2019. We did a world trip over about 2 weeks, I think. We went to South Korea, Israel, Malta, Spain, Colombia, Peru, Machu Picchu, Easter Island. Oh, that was bloody fantastic. Easter Island, you know, in the middle of nowhere, huge bloody statues. Easter Island, and back to Sydney, Australia, and then south to Melbourne. And it was a plane, it was a chartered plane where there was 200 passengers, right, which would be on the same plane for the whole 2.5 odd weeks that we traveled the world. We went right around. And I know for sure at the start that everybody was okay, right? Healthy, let's call it healthy. Now, what I noticed when we got back to Sydney, that's where we disembarked, all of us had to get off. It was 200 odd people. Now, you know, we're in a plane a fair bit, air-conditioned sort of situation. I reckon 50%, maybe more, of the people, as we were waiting to get disembarked from Sydney, were coughing their flaming lungs out, right? So there's something in a closed environment, right, with air-conditioned, artificial air, recycling, you know, I know the air conditioners on planes, and it must be refreshed every such a percent. I think it's 80% fresh air to 20 that can recycle. But about 50 to 60% of people were coughing, you know, which they definitely weren't, because I'm pretty aware of, I hate being on a plane when half the plane is coughing, you know, you go, geez, I don't know if I want to travel on this flight for too many hours, you know what I mean? So it was very noticeable when we came back after the 2.5 or whatever weeks it was, that half of the plane, is just a guess, is were coughing their heads off. A couple of guys that were really great drinkers behind me, not a cough came out of them, you know, that must have been boozed out of their mind or something, but they were totally, I won't say healthy, but they weren't coughing, put it that way. So that was just an observation I want to make.
I've noticed that too at like public events, for example, like a chess match. I've seen a couple chess matches online, and it's almost incessant sometimes, the coughing, and it seems to me, I wonder if it's like a subconscious thing that humans do when they're in groups. Like if there's one person, and that's maybe all it takes, who actually does need to cough, and they have to cough, it like almost subconsciously motivates other people to cough, even if they are not sick. You know, it's like, especially at a chess match, it's like, yo, it's almost like being at a golf tournament. You have to be quiet, you know, to be respectful to the competitors, and then they're just coughing up a storm. I'm like, if I was running this chess tournament, I would throw anybody out who was coughing. You know,
I think we are, what would you call it? We do mimic each other, you know, for no reason. I mean,
it's like, I think it was, I don't know what it was, it was probably the 18th century, but it was a while ago, like when people would use the word ape, not as a noun, but
ape each other, copy each other.
Yeah.
You mean? Yeah.
We don't really use it anymore, but it makes me think of that.
Well, you know, we used to do that at school sometimes for a bit of fun, right? We'd say, hey, let's try something here, and we get a couple of our mates at the school ground, right, at playtime, and we'd say, let's point to something in the sky and go, oh, well, this, right, about 3 or 4. Hey, look, wow, yeah, oh, wow. You know, before you knew it, you had a dozen of people looking up, right? We just have this need to sort of copy what you say.
Yeah. I remember my I think it was my first psychology teacher. Actually, he said that once. He was, but he was like, if you do it in like the hallway, if you just get like 1 or 2 people to like point up at the ceiling, you'll get like half a dozen people.
They're gone. We're real mimickers, you know, or apers.
Yeah.
As you said, you know, I don't know where that word come from, where that apes do that a lot, but it was definitely a word, you know. What did you call it? Aping.
Yeah, and I think it has to do with the mirror neurons in our brain too, and how we learn by watching other people. So it's almost like you said, like kind of primitive and like subconscious, where you have to put in an extra effort to override that.
It must be a group energy or something, you know. You're sort of part of the whole primitive, you know, belonging, or I don't know. And also, you know, you've got that other aspect of you, which is your individuality, and that's a beauty, I reckon, of human beingness, is that we are part of the whole, sort of, you know, energetically, or, you know, it's not really that obvious, but we're also such diverse individuals. You know, the study of these Australian guys are talking about our ancient origins, you know, that it looks like the Australian, and this guy that's doing the research is not calling them aboriginals, because you know, abnormal really means not normal. So aboriginals really means not originals. So this guy is saying the natives of Australia are the original, right? The original indigenous people that ever walked the earth. That's his theory. That's their theory. And they're coming up with some really interesting strange fossil evidence, and also DNA evidence that these fossils, that we can't even relate to any DNA on this planet that these some of these skulls have. That's, you know, the other intriguing thing, and also some of the rings and artifacts that he's been finding. He's had chemical analysis done on them, and they're basically a brass ring, like a copper zinc type of you know, matrix, but they've got these intriguing 4 or 5, let's call it, what do they call it? Something elements, additional elements, you know, making a very small percentages. Just some have titanium, 0.1%, compared to the major component of copper and zinc, which adds up to 90% total. So you might have a little bit of gold, you know, very small percentage, a little bit of titanium, a little bit of lead, a little bit of iron, you know, that sort of mixture. And you go, but there's one particular ring that he had analysed, and it was very high in aluminium. Totally didn't make sense for a alloy, and there was 23% of this chemical analysis of this ring that had no earthly composition on the chemical periodic table. In other words, there was 25 or 23% of something in this ring, which
an element they couldn't identify.
That couldn't identify. It was an unidentified void of 23% in this ring, which, you know, they're sort of building this story about, it seems like the original human race first came to Australia. People have said that the Australian Aboriginals, we'll call them originals, actually were very, very much as they had been for thousands of years when the Brits first ran into them in the, you know, 1700s. You know, they never built anything of brick or mortar or anything, right? They were just living off the land and just moving on, and never over exploiting their areas, and there was very little warfare between them. They were living very natural and very healthy and very, you know, spiritual lives, until the bloody Poms, as we call them, came along and said, hey, you guys need Christianity. You don't know what's going on in the world. Unbelievable, you know. You go, geez. Apparently, some of the explorers that went around Tasmania, the southeastern part of Australia, saw Aborigines with no clothes on. Now, it's pretty south. The latitude of Tasmania is fairly south, might be about 40 degrees, 45 degrees, southern latitude, and gets bloody cold in winter, I tell you. And they saw Aborigines or original Tasmanians with no clothes on. And the missionary priests that went on these early, British exploration sites and Dutch exploration sites as well. Actually, a Dutchman was the one that named the little island of Tasmania Van Diemen originally, and then a bit later on another Dutchman came along. He said, "No, I'll call it Abel Tasman after my name." So that's how Tasmania came, from this Dutch guy called Abel Tasman. But the missionaries that they brought along and were observing the land saw these bloody naked Aboriginal Tasmanians, and they said, "Hey, we need to give them blankets." And these guys knew how to keep warm in winter with no clothes on. And us smart asses, from Europe came along and said, "No, you need Christianity. You need, you need to be civil, mate. This is not civil living. I mean, how could you live in this country, Never mind how long have you been here, and you look like you're managing all right. Who are we to bloody interfere?" When you look at that in history, you say, what gall did we have, as, what do you call it, colonial people to interfere with other countries. And Australia was called Australia Terra Nullius or something. Terra Nullius means a land that doesn't belong to anybody. There was bloody original Australians running around. Okay, not too many, maybe only 100,000, maybe 1 million. They didn't go around bloody with any census papers to see how many bloody original Indigenous people were around at the time. But, the gall, as I said, to come along and just, this is what you need. You guys aren't civil. Boom, here we go. And you go, wow. That's why I like to look at our original history and how far back it goes. And there's more and more coming out every year, every month. And like you said, what do I see is happening. What's happening now, I think, is from a historical point of view, when you look at our history, it's been nothing but blood and guts, war, sacrifice, right? More war, taking what doesn't belong to you, grabbing his bit of land and all this for years. And that's all we've ever known. War, sacrifice, suffering, pain. What the hell is this human race all about? And I reckon from all the, traditional, ancient, sacred texts from the various, countries and religious cultures around the world over time, and what's still in written forms and still oral traditions that remain, suggest that we live in cycles, and there's a golden age coming again, right? Speaking of wars, and where do I see? I think this may be our, what do you call it, storm before the calm, which is not usually how it's said, but this might be the last, trauma before we get into what I see as a bloody great golden age of peace and joy and love and prosperity again on this beautiful planet of Mother Earth,
I think you could be right there, Mr. Kenter. And I don't want to make it seem like it's black or white, but it seems to me that it could either be a case that trends that way, or it could be another, wide scale global war that ends in the deaths of tens of millions of people. So yeah, well said. But just wrapping up our hour here, Mr. Kenter, what do you want to tell people to focus on or point their attention to? And yeah, any closing comments on your analysis of everything that's been going on?
Look, people will say, what can you do? What can I do? Right now, what can you really do? What can a president of a country really do? What have they really done when you look back? You go, oh yeah, they did this, they did that. But what can you personally do, right? Very little. I mean, I've got a lovely wife in the background. What can I do to make her love me, or to do what I want her to do? Bloody nothing, right? If she chooses not to do it, or if I am too forceful into wanting it my way, I'll be on the street, on the highway soon enough, and there'll be no relationship, because sooner or later she's going to say, no, I'm not putting up with that crap, mate. I've got my, my life to live and what's not. So simply speaking, what can you do? What can I do? Is really how you want to look at it, because, everybody sees themselves as so insignificant and so puny and so bloody helpless, but we're bloody hugely powerful. But there's an old saying, Eddie, is to change the world, start with yourself. You go, yeah, I've heard that before. What am I supposed to do? What can you do to change your neighbour's view about you? What can you do about your other neighbour's view of how they see you? Very little. You can just go by example, be who you want to be who you are, be at peace with yourself. Don't be angry, don't get upset. Drop the fear. Do not focus on war, negativity, bloody bullshit in the newspaper. Turn off the TV, turn off the newspapers, or don't get them delivered to your front door. Don't go buying them. Live at peace. Nurture your well-being from within. It's from within that your abundance start, really, right? If you're at peace within yourself, it'll spread to your children, to the guy down the street. How much do you want to influence? You want to influence the whole town? Is that going to make you, I've got 2,000 followers on my YouTube channel. You beauty. Yeah, look, now I can do this and now I can that. I think George was going through that motion, and you yourself went through that motion. You go, oh, look at the numbers. Oh, I got bloody whacked again. Oh, shit, I got to start all over again. Crap,
It's hard to avoid the negative feeling when that happens, especially for the first one for me, when it was like my biggest channel. But yeah, I understand what you're saying.
I mean, you, like I asked you before we started, that, how do you survive in this situation where you get whacked and then, it's not looking that great, blah, blah, blah. What can you do? First of all, you've got to be at peace with yourself, right? Try not to be upset. Try not to get sucked into the fear and the negativity around you, right? And look, little bits at a time, you don't need to change your whole town. You don't need to be number one sprinter or this or that. Be at peace with yourself, and you'll start to see a peaceful world, spreading out from you. That's really all I can say, because people do feel a bit powerless when they're, in fact, they're very powerful. I've got a little creation trick I have with myself, and I discussed it with my financial advisor one time. I said to him, we create our own reality. You realise that, don't you? Whatever conversation we're in, he goes, what do you mean? I said, when I drove up here from my place with my wife, we're about 4 kilometres from his office. I said, I said to that guy, financial advisor, I visualised that there will be a parking spot right in front of your office when we turned up, 5 minutes up the road. He goes, yeah, what about it? I said, I visualised it. I didn't doubt it for 1 minute. My wife was sitting next to me. I said, I'm going to visualise the spot. We're going to find a parking spot right in front of you. She goes, my wife started to go, no, you won't. It's peak hour. This, and I said to my wife, look, just shut your mouth for a minute. Keep your negativity down. I'm focusing on finding a parking spot. So we drive up to the 2 bloody parking spot right in front in the busiest time of the day that we happened to have to go to his office. Was right there, and I was telling him, And then a few weeks later, he said, I tried that trick too, Bob, and it works. So that is just a little example of the small miracle that you can start with to start believing that you're not such a little deal of insignificant, power. Start with a little test with yourself, a little example like that, and then build on it, and then start to see that your world does start to change because you are changing within, and then you start to see the world from within as a beautiful place to be. So that's probably a good place to finish.
Awesome. Thank you, Bob Kenter. I really appreciate it. And let's do this sooner rather than later again. Time slips away from us, almost like you're trying to grab smoke with your bare hands. I didn't realize it had been so long. I thought it was in the spring. I was like, oh no, you're right. It was in the fall.
Yeah, no, it was November, I think, sometime. Have you still got that tape?
Yeah, it's on my PeerTube. It should be on my PeerTube and on a few other channels. I can, you know what I might do is I'll probably post it as a comment
because I lost it. Video. I think you got wiped off there not too long after that.
I don't think it's on YouTube anymore. No,
that's what I mean.
All of my interviews, pretty much. There's only a couple that are still on YouTube, but I've been trying to direct people. PeerTube, it has all my work, all video work is going to be on my PeerTube forever and ever, as long as I keep working with that company and paying them their dues. It'll be up there. It's a distributed network, and it only gets taken down if I want it taken down. So, I'll send that to you, and then I'll try to post that in the comments and the description boxes below as well. But I want to thank everybody.
Is anybody listening?
Yeah, we got some people in the house. It was.
How do you tell?
When I use StreamYard, it lets me know, and then if I want to pull up comments, there is a way to pull up comments as well.
Infidel, hang on, Tuvo, great, because I know these guys, right? I just want to say hello to Creative Woodwork.
I want to give a shout out to Infidel because he helped me set up my Telegram and kind of helped me troubleshoot some stuff with setting up my Telegram. So shout out to Infidel for being an awesome.
Good on you, mate. I often have a little chat to him on George's channels or some others that we follow together. Corky Goss, I asked him to watch.
I met Corky. I actually met Corky.
Yeah, I saw that. Lovely.
Yeah, that was fun. That's fun. He can play the what's it called, the harmonica. Yeah, he's a pretty good harmonica player. So that was pretty hang on with Corky. But let's do this.
Look, you give me a buzz.
Yeah, of course, we'll do so. I won't wait 8 months this time.
Well, no, it's up to you. I don't know if you find it interesting what I'm doing, but
no, it was great.
If you do,
it was great.
Now,
much
I've got Zoom, and is Zoom a possibility for this or not, or is this easier for you or more?
I usually use StreamYard just because it's easier for me. Because Zoom is nice because it's easy to set up for people who don't have software. But StreamYard is likewise the same way, and you can multi-stream. So I'm going to my Facebook profile page, my Facebook public page, my YouTube, my Twitter, my Twitch, and my PeerTube right now as well. And then I will upload this to Brand New Tube and BitChute and Rumble because you can live stream on Rumble, but you have to pay for it. And Brand New Tube and BitChute, you really can't feasibly do that. Certainly not on BitChute. Brand New Tube is just upload instead of live streaming because you have to text the tech guy every single time. So, but I'll send you the link to our first chat on my PeerTube. So, thanks again, Bob. I really appreciate it. And thanks everybody for tuning in. We will see everybody next time. And again, this is going to be available anywhere the podcasts can be found, on the Public Intelligence podcast as well, for all my audio listeners and for the non-video people. So until next time, folks, with Bob Kenter, stay frosty.
Stay frosty.